Imagine walking into a room where one person has the power to drain your energy, trigger your anger, and make you question your worth without even touching you. Now imagine someone else walking into the same room and staying calm, confident, and unshaken, as if that toxic energy has no doorway into their mind. What's the difference? Smart people don't allow toxic people to control their inner world. They don't fight fire with fire. They change the environment inside themselves. Today, we're diving deep into how the smartest, most emotionally intelligent people deal with toxic people. Not by reacting, but by leading. Smart people don't fight for control. They protect their peace. And this single shift transforms the entire dynamic with toxic individuals. When they encounter someone who thrives on negativity, manipulation, or emotional chaos, their first instinct isn't to argue or win. Their instinct is to stay centered, calm, and rooted in clarity. They understand a fundamental truth. A toxic person's power doesn't come from strength, intelligence, or confidence. It comes from your reaction. The moment you allow their words or behavior to hijack your emotions, you hand them control. So smart people refuse to give that control away. They choose to manage their inner world with intentionality. They've mastered something most people never learn: emotional distance without physical distance. Even if the toxic person is standing right in front of them, even if the words are sharp, disrespectful, or dismissive, they create a psychological space and internal boundary that says, I see what you're doing, and I'm not participating. They don't mirror the negativity. They don't match the tone. They don't escalate the conversation. Instead, they keep their voice low, their words measured, and their mind steady. They know that reacting emotionally is exactly what a toxic person wants. Emotional chaos is their oxygen. So they take that oxygen away by responding with intention. But protecting peace is not a passive act. It's a decision, a discipline. Smart people stay conscious of their triggers. They analyze situations before reacting. If someone tries to provoke them, they pause. They let silence do the work. Silence to a toxic person is confusing. It denies them the emotional satisfaction they seek. And in that moment, the balance of power shifts. Suddenly, the toxic individual realizes they can't control the smart person's mood, mindset, or direction. That alone weakens their influence. Smart people also understand that not every attack needs a defense. Not every insult needs a comeback. Not every argument needs participation. Sometimes the most powerful statement is the one you never say. They don't waste energy trying to change someone who has no desire to grow. They don't invest in conversations that go nowhere. Instead, they save their emotional energy for the people who treat them with respect, for the goals that move them forward, and for the environments where their peace is valued, not violated. And here's the profound part. By choosing peace over reaction, they reclaim their power. They communicate without words that they are in charge of themselves, of their emotions, their responses, and their energy. Toxic people may try to provoke them, judge them, or pull them into chaos, but it doesn't work because smart people know the truth. You don't have to control others. You only have to control yourself. When you do that, no toxic person can take your peace away. Smart people communicate with clarity, not emotion, because they understand that toxic people use confusion as a weapon. A toxic person thrives when the conversation becomes emotional, messy, and unpredictable. They twist words, play the victim, shift blame, or escalate tension to regain control. But smart people don't step into that trap. They know that when emotions rise, logic falls, so they anchor themselves in clarity, simple, direct, firm communication that leaves. No room for manipulation. They don't argue to be right. They communicate to be understood. Their words are chosen carefully, not to attack, not to defend, but to state facts. They say what needs to be said and nothing more. They avoid emotional, rambling, exaggerated statements or reactive phrases because they know the toxic person will use those against them. Instead of saying, you always do this, they say, this behavior is not acceptable. Instead of explaining endlessly, they give short, clear statements. They don't justify their boundaries because boundaries don't need justification. They don't over-explain their choices because clarity doesn't need validation. When toxicity rises, smart people lower their emotional tone but heighten the sharpness of their words. Calm is their superpower. It disarms the other person. The toxic individual expects anger, panic, or defensiveness. They expect emotional fuel. But when the smart person responds calmly, it interrupts the toxic person's pattern. It confuses them. They lose footing. They can't use emotional chaos to redirect the conversation. Smart people know exactly what they're doing. Their clarity is a shield, strong enough to protect them and sharp enough to cut through manipulation. Another thing they do exceptionally well is state boundaries, not feelings. Toxic people love when conversations shift into emotional territory because emotions can be argued with, dismissed, or mocked, but boundaries cannot. So instead of saying, I feel hurt when you talk to me like that, a smart person says, don't speak to me like that. This difference is crucial. It locks the conversation into behavior, not emotion. It leaves no space for debate. Toxic people hate clarity because it eliminates their ability to twist. Above all, smart people communicate with intention. Every word has a purpose. They're not trying to win the argument, they're trying to end the chaos. Their communication is not loud, but it is powerful. It doesn't provoke, but it does protect. It doesn't feed the toxicity, but it does expose it. And that is why toxic people eventually stop arguing with them, because clarity removes the playground where manipulation once lived. Smart people distance without guilt because they understand that emotional health is not a luxury, it's a necessity. They know that staying close to someone who constantly drains their energy, disrespects their boundaries, or manipulates their emotions is an act of self-betrayal. So when they recognize toxicity, they don't wait for permission, approval, or applause. They step back, and they do it with confidence, not shame. They have learned that preserving their mental peace is far more important than maintaining a relationship that poisons their well-being. They also understand something most people struggle with. You don't owe access to anyone who consistently harms your emotional state. Smart people know that compassion is valuable, but self-sacrifice is not. They don't confuse kindness with allowing mistreatment. They don't confuse loyalty with tolerating disrespect. And they certainly don't confuse guilt with responsibility. When they choose to distance themselves, they're not abandoning someone, they're choosing themselves. They give themselves permission to walk away from conversations that go nowhere, from arguments designed to provoke, and from people who take but never give. What makes them truly wise is that they don't wait for the toxic person to change. They don't hold on to false hope or fantasies about potential. They look at patterns, not promises. They look at actions, not apologies. And when those patterns continually harm their mental space, they know it's time to step back. Distance becomes a strategy, not for revenge, but for preservation. It becomes a way of reclaiming their emotional energy, their focus, and their confidence. Smart people know that distancing doesn't require anger, it only requires clarity. And here is the part that separates them from most people: they don't feel guilty. Guilt is what keeps many people trapped in toxic dynamics. Guilt whispers, you're selfish, you're abandoning them, or you're overreacting. But smart people rewrite that narrative. They remind themselves, I'm allowed to protect my peace, my mental health matters, and this distance is necessary, not cruel. They refuse to carry the weight of someone else's behavior. They refuse to let guilt become a leash tied to toxic hands. Over time, this distance transforms their life. Their energy returns, their confidence grows, their clarity sharpens, they become calmer, stronger, and more grounded. And something interesting happens. The toxic person loses access, loses influence, loses power, because distance is not just physical, it's emotional. It sends a message: you no longer get to control how I feel. Smart people don't distance themselves to hurt others, they distance themselves to heal themselves. And that single choice often becomes the turning point where their life begins to rebuild, strengthen, and rise again. Smart people don't personalize toxic behavior because they understand a life-changing truth. People project what they carry inside. When someone is angry, bitter, manipulative, or disrespectful, it is almost always a reflection of their inner battles, not the person they attack. Smart people see this clearly. They don't absorb the poison that isn't theirs. They don't take insults as identity. They don't take negativity as truth. Instead, they step back mentally and observe the behavior like an outsider. They tell themselves, this is about them, not me, and that single sentence protects their self-worth from being hijacked. They know that toxic people often operate from unresolved wounds, ego wounds, insecurity wounds, control issues, or emotional immaturity. So when a toxic person lashes out, blames others, or creates chaos, smart people view it as a pattern, not a personal attack. They understand that a person who is at war with themselves will eventually try to start a war with others. Rather than getting pulled into the emotional storm, they stay grounded. They don't let the toxic narrative seep into their identity. They don't let someone else's brokenness define their value. The secret is perspective. Smart people zoom out. They see the situation from a higher mental altitude. Instead of thinking, why are they treating me this way? They think, what pain or insecurity is driving this behavior? This mindset doesn't justify the toxicity, but it does neutralize the emotional impact. It stops the toxic person from getting under their skin. It prevents overthinking, emotional spirals, and self-blame. Because the moment you personalize toxicity, you give it power. But when you detach, the power dissolves. You stop trying to fix yourself for someone who refuses to fix themselves. Smart people also avoid internalizing harsh words. They know that if someone is disrespectful, controlling, or overly critical, it says more about the speaker than the listener. They remind themselves that toxicity is a pattern, not a verdict. They don't let the behavior echo in their minds all day. They don't replay the conversation looking for flaws in themselves. Instead, they consciously reject the negativity. They remind themselves of their strengths, values, and truths. They protect their self-esteem like a treasure, refusing to let toxic words leave permanent scars. This ability to not personalize doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from emotional intelligence. It comes from understanding human behavior deeply. Smart people know that toxic individuals project insecurity, fear, and inadequacy onto others because they cannot handle their own emotional weight. So instead of absorbing the projection, they reflect it back without anger. They stay calm, composed, and self-assured. And because they refuse to internalize the toxicity, the toxic person eventually loses emotional influence. In the end, smart people protect their peace by refusing to carry what does not belong to them. They understand that someone's behavior is a mirror of their inner world, not a measure of their worth. And that understanding sets them emotionally free. Smart people set boundaries early and enforce them clearly because they understand that toxic people don't respect silence, hints, or subtle signals. Toxic individuals push, test, and stretch limits until they find a weakness. That's why smart people don't wait until they're exhausted, frustrated, or emotionally drained to draw the line. They set boundaries at the very first sign of disrespect. And they do it not with anger, but with unwavering clarity. They know that boundaries are not walls meant to isolate. They are guidelines meant to protect emotional well-being, preserve dignity, and define how they expect to be treated. They also understand that a boundary is only as strong as its enforcement. If you say, "Don't speak to me like that," but tolerate it repeatedly, that's not a boundary, it's a suggestion. So smart people follow through. When they say, "I won't continue this conversation if you raise your voice," and the toxic person raises their voice, they walk away. When they say, "I'm not comfortable discussing this," and the toxic person pushes again, they shut the conversation down. When they say, "I need space," they actually take space. Their actions match their words. This consistency teaches toxic people something important. Disrespect has consequences. Smart people are also skilled at keeping boundaries simple. They don't over-explain or justify. They don't prepare long emotional speeches. They don't negotiate with manipulation. They state their limits in short, direct, unshakable sentences. Toxic people thrive on confusion, but boundaries destroy confusion. Toxic people thrive on emotional chaos, but boundaries create order. This is why boundaries are one of the most powerful tools smart people use. They take away the toxic person's ability to control the narrative. What makes their boundaries even more effective is that they don't apologize for them. They don't say, "I'm sorry, or I hope you don't mind," but because they understand that an apology weakens the boundary. A boundary doesn't need approval. It doesn't need understanding. It doesn't need permission. It only needs consistency. Smart people set boundaries with the mindset of, "This is what I will and will not accept. Whether you like it or not is your problem, not mine." And here's the deeper wisdom smart people carry. Boundaries are an expression of self-respect. By setting and enforcing them, they send a powerful message to the toxic person and to themselves. That message is, "I value my peace more than your approval. I value my well-being more than your opinion. I value my life enough to protect it from anything that threatens it." The result? Toxic people slowly lose their grip. They can no longer manipulate, guilt trip, or control the smart person because there is no space left for their behavior to land. Boundaries build emotional distance. Distance builds clarity, and clarity builds strength. By protecting their space early and firmly, smart people ensure that toxicity never becomes part of the foundation of their life. Smart people choose growth over drama because they understand that attention is energy, and energy shapes the direction of their life. Toxic people are experts at creating noise, conflict, and emotional disruption. They drag conversations into negativity, twist situations into chaos, and turn simple moments into battles. But smart people refuse to live in environments where drama becomes the center of gravity. They consciously redirect their time, thoughts, and emotional resources toward things that build them, not break them. Instead of being pulled into arguments, gossip, or pointless conflict, they rise above it and invest in personal growth, purpose, and meaningful connections. They know drama is addictive. It tempts the ego. It gives temporary satisfaction. It creates a feeling of importance. But it also steals mental clarity, kills productivity, and weakens emotional stability. Smart people recognize these traps early. When they see drama forming, they take a step back. When someone tries to provoke them, they stay silent. When someone tries to involve them in conflict, they disengage. Not because they are weak, but because they are wise. They choose elevation over reaction. They choose progress over distraction. They understand that where they place their attention determines who they become. Smart people also surround themselves with people who reflect growth, not chaos. They spend time with individuals who inspire them, challenge them, support their dreams, and hold them accountable. They know that energy is contagious. Sit with drama long enough and you become part of it. Sit with growth long enough and you rise with it. That's why they intentionally build circles filled with positivity, ambition, respect, and emotional intelligence. In such environments, growth becomes natural, effortless, and continuous. Toxicity loses its power because it no longer matches the vibration of the life they are creating. But the most powerful thing about choosing growth is that it changes how smart people see challenges. Instead of getting stuck in emotional reactions, they ask better questions. What is this teaching me? How can I grow from this? What does this reveal about the other person and about myself? They turn every negative situation into a lesson. They convert every conflict into perspective. They transform every toxic encounter into clarity about what they will no longer tolerate. Their mindset shifts from surviving the moment to building the future. In choosing growth over drama, smart people reclaim control of their life. They stop giving toxic individuals the power to dictate their emotional state. They stop wasting energy on people who drain them. They stop allowing chaos to define their days. Their focus becomes sharper. Their goals become clearer. Their identity becomes stronger. And slowly, the toxic people fade into the background. Not because they disappeared, but because they no longer fit into the life the smart person is choosing. Smart people handle toxic individuals with a calm strength that comes from deep self-awareness. They don't get pulled into emotional traps or destructive conversations. Instead, they recognize the patterns of negativity and choose a response rooted in clarity and self-control. They protect their peace with intention, knowing that their emotional stability is too valuable to be handed over to anyone who thrives on chaos. By refusing to engage in unnecessary conflict, they reclaim their power and maintain a steady sense of inner balance. They understand that communication is a tool, not a battlefield. Where toxic people confuse, manipulate, or provoke, smart people use direct and simple language to dismantle manipulation. They don't over-explain, and they don't feed emotional fires. They stay composed, grounded, and strategic. Their clarity becomes a mirror that exposes the truth, leaving no space for games or deception. This kind of communication drastically reduces a toxic person's influence because without emotional fuel, the manipulation loses its force. As they grow more aware of toxic behaviors, smart people distance themselves without guilt. They recognize the difference between compassion and self-neglect. They know that stepping away is not cruelty, it's self-respect. They set boundaries with confidence, enforce them with consistency, and protect their mental and emotional well-being fiercely. Boundaries are not about shutting people out, they're about letting the right people in and keeping the wrong energy far away. This discipline helps smart people stay focused on what truly matters, their goals, their peace, and their growth. Ultimately, smart people choose growth over drama because they know their future is too important to waste on meaningless conflict. They invest their energy in learning, improving, and building environments that uplift them. Toxic people naturally fade from their lives because they no longer match the frequency of the purpose-driven mindset. When you prioritize peace, focus, and emotional maturity, you create a life where toxicity cannot survive. That is the true power of a smart, self-aware individual. They design a life so strong, so intentional, and so meaningful that toxic energy simply cannot enter. Thank you for watching this video and giving your precious time to learn, grow, and evolve. Your presence here shows that you value your peace, your purpose, and your personal growth. Stay strong, stay aware, and always protect your energy. If this message helped you today, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful content. Thank you and goodbye. Stay blessed and stay rising.